Government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
We can meet our destiny to build a land here that will be for all mankind a shining city on a hill.
You're listening to the Liberty Brothers Radio Show, only on Revolution Radio. Now, here are your hosts, Jim White and Jason Van Tatenhove.
Crusade for freedom is your chance and mine to fight communism.
Please hang up and try again.
This is Mack.
Hello, Sheriff Richard Mack. This is Jason and Jim with the Liberty Brothers Radio Show. How are you doing today?
My Liberty Brothers. I'm doing great.
Let me give you a quick introduction and get things started off right. On the line with us, we have Sheriff Richard Mack. Sheriff Richard Mack is best known for challenging the Brady Bill, a gun control scheme requiring local law enforcement to perform background checks on prospective gun purchasers. He maintained that the federal government had no authority to command local officials and became the first sheriff in American history to sue the federal government under the Clinton administration and win at the U.S. Supreme Court. The case was based on the 10th Amendment, states' rights, and local sovereignty. Since that landmark ruling, Mack has written 6 books and appeared at over 120 Tea Party rallies nationwide. He has stood against the incursions of the federal government and has fought for civil rights from Hawaii to Bangor, Maine. He is the founder and president of the Constitutional Sheriff and Peace Officer Association, a CSPOA, and is on the Oath Keepers Board of Directors. Welcome to the show, Sheriff Mack.
Thanks so much. I'm really proud to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, I think really the big question on the radar right now really is kind of what your reaction might be to what's happened in Ferguson. And I think you'll have a very unique perspective because I know we need to balance, arming our law enforcement and making sure they've got, adequate ways to protect themselves and defend themselves and to peaceably enforce the law. But at the same time, we don't want a standing military that has full military equipment and looks very much like a military, like an army. Where do you think? What are your thoughts on what happened in Ferguson and what we saw there?
Well, overall in America, there's a dearth of leadership when it comes to proper training of our law enforcement. The sheriffs and chiefs of police of this country focus far too much on officer safety and that each officer go home at night. And there's a lot worse things than not going home at night. And killing someone that shouldn't be killed is at the top of that list. I could never live with that. And I'm not pointing any fingers at the situation in Ferguson, Missouri. I'm pointing fingers at every situation across the country that happens similarly. And like Albuquerque Police Department and Las Vegas Metro, that when somebody is shot by a cop, it gets swept under the rug far too often. And we've got to take better charge of that. And the unions who continue to defend officers and fight for officers who've been involved in situations where the suspect was unarmed, these things must stop. And legislatively, they need to address this so that unions do not control this. And that they get so involved in these types of investigations. We have Miriam Carey, and maybe you don't remember that name. It's not Mariah Carey, the actress and singer. It's Miriam Carey, the black mother who was shot and killed in Washington, D.C. because she went down the wrong street. And these types of things have got to be addressed. And it's just ridiculous that the cops shot her and then nobody does an investigation. And where was Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton on that? I mean, it happened right in Washington, D.C. And the cops aren't even supposed to shoot at cars with a baby inside. They're not supposed to shoot at that car. And they could have stopped this car a lot of different ways, but that woman should not have been killed by cops. And they fired like 20 rounds at her and could have killed her baby. And so a lot of different policies were broken, and we don't even hear about that case anymore. And I'm astonished that we don't. And why we pick and choose, and why the black community picks and chooses which ones they jump on, and why we don't investigate all of these properly is still just beyond me. And I will tell you, I've been writing an article. I've been really busy and haven't been able to get it out there, but I wrote an article comparing Ferguson, Missouri to the incident at Bunkerville, Nevada with the Bundy protesters. I mean, the Bundy protesters were slammed to the pavement, were tased, were beaten, some were arrested, and there wasn't any looting going on in Bunkerville. But the stark and drastic difference is that the federal government enforcers and BLM, supposedly law enforcement officers of the BLM, which they are not a law enforcement arm, and that's the crazy thing about it, that they hired mercenaries and former mercenaries to police that situation. They were pointing high-powered rifles at unarmed protesters just about 24 hours a day. And yet that's never assailed by the media or other groups, and Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton sure didn't have a problem with that. But then when it happens in Ferguson, Missouri, I mean, officers are disciplined or fired. And I'm not even talking about the shooting situation. But the other thing was that really disturbed me is that the governor mentions it in Nevada, and others mention it. And Harry Reid said what a great job the BLM had done, and he called the protesters domestic terrorists. Well, what happened there? Well, the BLM created a makeshift free speech corral, and they said, we will allow you free speech, but you have to do it in this corral. If you don't stay within this fenced area for free speech, then we will arrest you. Why didn't they try that in Ferguson, Missouri? And if they had done that, what would have been the outrage by the Al Sharptons and the Jesse Jacksons and other politicians? There was no outrage about that occurring in Nevada. Even though the governor assailed it, criticized it, was against it, he did nothing about it. And nobody else followed up. The media didn't seem to care either. And so I just wonder what is going on nationally that we allow these types of atrocities to occur. And I'm all for proper, fair investigations and impartial investigations on every one of these incidents, but especially when government has committed the crime.
Sheriff Mack, this is Jim. First of all, I want to thank you so much for joining us today, and I appreciate your work. The city council of Davis, California, in the stories on the Daily Sheeple, they have said to the police, you have 60 days to get rid of your MRAP military vehicle. Do you see this being perhaps starting maybe a wave of municipalities across the country? Because I think generally speaking, I think people want the law enforcement to have the proper equipment to be able to do the job they need to do. I don't think anyone would argue with that.
Yeah,
however, I think people get a little bit unnerved with when these huge vehicles go rolling through towns of 1,200, 1,500 people. What do you think, Sheriff?
Yeah, well, my new book talks about that. I just released a book, and it's available at our website, CSPOA.org, to get Are You a David? And it addresses the militarization of law enforcement. Now, I specifically have asked some sheriffs and police departments, why did you get that MRAP? It's a military vehicle, and it's basically used when the chips are really down. When the shinola hits the fan, you bring in the MRAP. And, one good sheriff said, look, police are armed. We have high-powered rifles. Every one of us carries a gun, and we use those in defense of our community. He said, I have an MRAP, just in case we need it, to defend the people against whatever crime might occur from whatever the domestic disturbance or gang attack. And he even said, if there was a situation that occurred in my county that happened in Bunkerville, Nevada, between the citizens and the federal government, I would put that MRAP right in between them. You know, I couldn't argue too much with that. You know, but I do argue with this point. That situation should have never been allowed to escalate, and the sheriff could have stopped it on day one. And these types of incidents, when the federal government has overreacted and come in and just started shooting people, like they did in Waco and like they did in Ruby Ridge, Idaho, and both of those incidents occurred in 1992 and 1993. Nobody went to jail for killing unarmed people. You know, only the protesters and the other people involved, the citizens involved, they get in trouble, they get arrested, they go to jail, but nobody from the federal government for killing innocent people ever go. So
they get promoted. You know, they get promoted. Sorry.
You know, let's make a point here. Our police and sheriff's offices are paramilitary organizations. Their structure is sergeants and lieutenants and captains and majors and, you know, the chief and all this. You know, they salute, they follow orders, they try to keep the peace, and they have to kill people sometimes. But when they go outside their lawful authority, what the problem is in this country is it's never addressed, and people should be scared about the militarization of the police departments because they have not earned the trust of the American people. They don't handle their situations properly. They don't prevent these things from getting out of control in the first place. They don't investigate cops impartially when they do get involved in shooting incidents, when especially the suspects were not armed. And we have to address that if we're going to get the confidence of the American people back.
Now, Sheriff, you had mentioned earlier, it goes back to training a little bit, and I got to tell you, I've over the last year become good friends with Sheriff Pyman, and got to spend some time down there with him in Jackson County, seeing how he does things, and also with Sheriff Christopher. You know, these are great guys that I just think are really doing things a lot differently than your average police force out there, and that if we would able to create a training program based on how some of these sheriffs across the country that are members of the CSPOA run their counties and their organizations, that we could really change this. Can you talk a little bit about how we might be able to go about trying to affect some change through the initial training process in the police academies and whatnot? Is there a way we could do that?
Yeah, there is, and you mentioned the solution in your question, and that is we've got to create more constitutional sheriffs. We need more of these sheriffs and chiefs of police and peace officers across this country getting more involved with the CSPOA. We are a reminder. We're not telling people how to do this or how to handle a police shooting. We're not telling them. We're not training in that. We're training in the fundamental patriotism of America. We're training to treat people not like subjects and slaves anymore. We want people to be protected when we want a relationship between the citizens and the police and the sheriff's office and the deputies and our patrol officers. There must be a relationship, and we must remind constantly that the people patrolling our streets and the peace officers patrolling our streets have got to be peace officers, and they have got to be true servants, and they've got to be reminded constantly that most of the people, 90% of the people they come in contact with, are going to be good, law-abiding American citizens, and that the other 10% are still going to be some pretty good people in there who are not armed and not trying to kill all the cops in the country. And that we need to be constantly on our guard, yes, and vigil, but that we need to be service-oriented and teaching our peace officers to actually keep their oath of office, that they have sworn in God's name to uphold and defend and obey the United States Constitution. Why is it okay that we ignore that oath? Denny Pyman does not. Sheriff Christopher does not. Sheriff Palmer in Oregon does not. Sheriff Rogers in Indiana does not. And these people, Sheriff Gil Gilbertson in Oregon does not. And many other sheriffs across the country. Sheriff Finch in Florida. And there's many others. Sheriff Page in North Carolina. And Sheriff Clark in Milwaukee. These are people who are standing for principles of liberty, and they're making a difference. And right now, we even have the chief of police in Detroit, for God's sakes, this is unheard of, who is saying gun ownership has decreased crime and stopped a lot of crime in his county, and in his city. And so when you finally get these honest peace officers like this who are telling people the truth, be armed, be ready, work with us, train with us, and make sure you know what you're doing, and let's work together to reduce crime. When you have that and you gain that relationship, then I'm telling every one of your listeners and every one of your brothers of liberty, male or female, I don't care, you've got to get involved with this process. We can take America back, but if we the people sit back and expect somebody else to do it, it's not going to happen. We the people are the most important facet of the American dream, the American experiment, and of our own government. We have got to know our sheriffs, we have got to know our patrol officers, and we've got to get involved in making sure we're not going to let things be swept under the rug. We want honesty, we want fairness, and we want every peace officer and sheriff's office in this country trained in the CSPOA philosophy of protect and serve and obeying the Constitution as we do. So to uphold and defend, to protect and serve. We can't forget American ideals as peace officers of this country and expect to adequately and appropriately and effectively patrol the streets of America.
You know, Sheriff Mack, I interviewed on my news program, Northwest Liberty News, a couple of days ago. I interviewed Sheriff candidate Bill Clark. He's running for sheriff here in Lincoln County, Montana. I interviewed him.
I saw part of that. Yeah.
Oh, well, great. Yeah, he's a great. I'd say one thing. He's the kind of guy that you just spoke of. I think he's the real deal. You know, and he said a couple of things to me that stuck with me. First, he said, you know, Jim, in my career in law enforcement, we used to be out of the car more. We used to be out of the vehicle more with the people. He goes,
yeah.
In the community. He goes, hey, that's one of the things we need. And, I asked him flat out towards the end of the interview. I said, here's the big question, Bill. I said, if the federal government comes into your county and you're sheriff, are you prepared to stand up, and face the federal government, as a representative of your people? And he said, absolutely. But he goes, Jim, I need the people to stand behind me as well.
Absolutely.
Talk for a minute. Just how important is it to have, and maybe you might have some insights on how to build that relationship. But a sheriff can't do it without the people behind him. Is that fair?
It is fair, and it's extremely accurate, and it falls in line with what I'm saying. And I want every single person listening to this program and watching that interview with Clark on TV or on YouTube, every one of them should become members of the CSPOA. Join us in this movement. We're dedicating our lives to restoring the Constitution, county by county and sheriff by sheriff in this country, and get the law enforcement to make this paradigm shift away from being a numbers guy and a ticket writer and somebody who patrols around waiting to pounce on people, especially law-abiding citizens and especially gun owners. How do we stop gun control in America? How do we stop the abuse of the BLM and the EPA? How do we stop the criminality and Gestapo tactics of the IRS? I'm going to tell you right now, one sheriff at a time. A constitutional sheriff who knows and understands his duty to protect and serve his people. And that means from all enemies, both foreign and domestic. Anybody who's a threat to to our Constitution and to the God-given rights of a citizen, that is the enemy. It doesn't matter if they work for a stupid bureaucracy in Washington. That doesn't give them any carte blanche or any exemptions. And does the sheriff say, oh, well, I'll fight all crimes and I'll fight all abuse, but not if it comes from the IRS? Well, it's obvious that Washington, D.C. and United States Congress are not going to rein in the IRS or abolish the IRS or keep them from attacking and victimizing the American people. So who has to do it? Well, the ultimate protector in your community is the sheriff. We hope chiefs of police work with your sheriffs in doing that. We invite all of them to keep their oath of office, just like everyone else should. And the sheriff can lead the way on this, but if he doesn't have the support of the people, this isn't going to work. And so the sheriff candidate Clark is absolutely correct. Everyone in Montana, in Lincoln County, should be getting behind him. Let's vote for liberty for once in this great country of ours. Let's stop looking at who's your friend and who did this and who's the best cop and who's got the most law enforcement experience. Well, Clark has that too. But he's going to be dedicated to the principles of liberty that really matter to our families and to our future. And that's what we do at the CSPOA. And everybody can become a member. It doesn't matter if you're a citizen, former cop, or a current sheriff, or a candidate. And everybody can join, and everybody should. This is really the new wave and the new solution. And it's really not a new solution. It's an old one. It's called state sovereignty. But we really need to get more people involved in this movement. We need to make it a household name.
I agree. And I tell you one thing, Sheriff, every sheriff that I've met that's been a member of the CSPOA, they all seem to be cut from the same sort of a mold. They're all unique, of course, and all great men that I know, but they've all got that, they got that it factor. You just know that they're when it comes right down to it, and it's on the line. This is the guy you want standing behind you. You just know. It's almost a feeling. You probably feel that same way, I'm sure, about your colleagues.
Well, when I meet with these guys at our conventions and they're there, you can feel the spirit of freedom so strongly, and I mean literally. I mean at a couple of them, I felt like I bumped into some of our founding fathers and at these meetings, and I'm serious. I really felt that, and I believe that maybe some of the founders were there watching this new excitement over liberty and restoring our Constitution that our founders dedicated their lives to. If we allow the Constitution to be destroyed from within, like is happening now, it's our own fault. We have a solution, and we have a peaceful solution. And if we create more Sheriff Clarks, hopefully he'll be one, but we've got other Sheriff Clarks in the country. Sheriff Clark from Milwaukee. Boy, I hope those two Sheriff Clarks work together. I really hope we get Sheriff candidate Clark into office in Lincoln County, Montana. And the people of Montana have got to really start rallying around these constitutional candidates. If we continue to vote for mainstream candidates, whether Republican or Democrat, and we keep staying mainstream, we're not going to change anything. Sure. We're going to actually make it worse.
Sheriff, we've actually got a question coming in from the chat room. One of our listeners is asking if you have a list of all the sheriffs that you have on board with your organization and where they might be able to check to see if their own local sheriff is a constitutional sheriff.
Well, we do, but we have said that we would not advertise that. They're on their own on that.
Okay.
But I'll tell you right now, we have very few in Montana. I am very disappointed in the sheriffs in Montana. I'm very disappointed in the sheriffs in Wyoming, and I'm very disappointed in the sheriffs in Texas. And I can't believe that those states aren't leading the way on creating and supporting this constitutional sheriff movement. I'm serious. We have maybe 2 sheriffs in all of Montana,
and one of them I know really won't admit outside of county that he really is constitutionally based, because we've talked to him before. And kind of wants to keep it on the down low. And that brings me to my next question. excuse me. So we've seen kind of a backlash of sorts from the powers that be with some of these constitutional sheriffs that are coming in. We've seen, Sheriff Pyman with his funding getting stripped and all kinds of shenanigans.
He gets voted out of office.
Yeah, by dead people and people in jail. So we're seeing it. We saw it happen in Delaware with Sheriff Christopher, and it seems to be happening across the country. You always hear these stories coming out on Drudge.
Sheriff Christopher still has a chance to stay in there. His primary is in about a week, maybe a couple of weeks.
We'll have to get him on before that primary.
But he is fighting so many different groups. I mean, he's fighting his own county commissioners. He's fighting the state. He's fighting the Attorney General, Beau Biden. He's fighting the state Supreme Court to maintain the position of sheriff as stated within their own constitution. The Delaware Constitution says that the sheriff is the conservator of the peace for the county. And now they're saying, well, you can be the conservator of the peace, but the only way that you do that is by serving papers. That's an absolute impossibility. That is such stupidity that I can't even fathom that those people could be in any position of leadership or of any intelligence whatsoever. That is beyond stupid to say, yes, you're the conservator of the peace, but you're only a paper server. And that's what they're doing in the East, and that's what they're doing in Delaware, and that's what they've done to Sheriff Christopher.
So how do you think we can best, moving forward, because obviously the message of liberty is a very popular message right now.
Well, actually, we don't move forward.
Well, how do we protect against it? How do we...
We go back.
Okay.
Yeah, the answer and the solution is if we go back. And I'm glad you actually said it that way, because it is something we don't want to move forward on. We want to go back and find the solutions in our own Constitution, in our own foundation, in our own state constitutions even. And then we go back to the power of the sheriff, that he is the ultimate people's protector as he was in our history. And instead of this, we don't need our sheriffs now, And there's been too much moving forward, if you will, to paraphrase that. In Pennsylvania, they're destroying the power of the sheriff. In Massachusetts, in Rhode Island, and a lot of these states, New York, and a lot of these states. And as I say New York, though, New York City does not have an elected sheriff. But they do in the rest of the counties in New York, and those sheriffs are standing against the gun control being shoved down their throats by Governor Cuomo, called the SAFE Act. And there's many sheriffs there fighting it. And even in New York we have this happening. We even have it happening in California. And the main point and the main question that I bring up in this book, Are You a David? I compare this to The Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. It's the worst of times, it's the best of times. And that's where we are in America today. But then I dovetail that into this question, and that's what we're talking about today. And that is this: which sheriff do you want in your county? And I'm asking everybody on this program, and I want to ask this question in Washington, D.C. I'm going to ask this very question at the National Press Club when the CSPOA holds their National Press Conference. Sheriff Christopher will be there. In fact, Sheriff Pyman is going to be there. And you guys are welcome to be there if you want to try to make that. It's on Constitution Day, September 17th, where we're going to ask the question to the entire country: which sheriff do you want in your community? Do you want a sheriff like Sheriff Doug Gillespie in Clark County, who said he would not intervene, he would not interfere, he didn't have the authority to get in the way, he didn't have the authority to keep his oath of office or tell the BLM to do anything, that they're the ultimate authority and they can do whatever they want in his county? And instead of doing his job and keeping the peace, he allowed the BLM to almost kill and start a civil war there, and the order to kill unarmed people was given. And miraculously, it didn't happen. And one of his deputies actually stood in the way that Sheriff Gillespie should have done. And he stopped people from being killed that day. And we want to praise Deputy Tom Roberts. On the other hand, on the very exact same situation that happened at Bunkerville, a few years before that, a Sheriff Tony DeMeo in Nye County, Nevada, stopped it. And he says, you know what, you guys probably do have a legal battle in court. I'm not going to get involved in that. but you're not going to take the Wayne Hague family's cattle. And the Wayne Hague family, everybody should look that case up. Hague, H-A-G-E. It's in my book. Just get my book, and you can see it all in there. And you will never see such a powerful book on this. This is the most important book of our time. I'm telling you, it's the best book for solutions that you'll ever see. It's the best book in America for legitimate, lawful, constitutional, and viable solutions. It's out there, it's available, and every American home should have this in it. So then, I'm asking the question, do you want a sheriff like Tony DeMeo, who stopped the cattle rustling by the federal government, and when the BLM came in to take the cattle, Sheriff Tony DeMeo was standing strong and walking tall there, and he says, you're not taking the cattle. And the BLM says, well, we're going to get our SWAT team and come back. And Tony DeMeo said, that's fine, I've got one too. And they didn't come back. And when the sheriffs stand against the federal government, they always stand down in every single case, and the book presents a lot of those to the readers so they know and they have it documented. So let me ask this question now, and I'm going to, again, like I said, I'm going to ask this question in Washington, D.C. at the National Press Club. Which sheriff do you want in your county and in your community and in your neighborhoods? The sheriff who does nothing and turns his back on situations and problems like we had at Bunkerville, Nevada, or the sheriff in Nye County, Nevada, who stood strong and told the federal government to back off and get out? Do you want that buffer in your community? Do you want that constitutional sheriff? I don't care what party you are. I don't care if you're a liberal. I don't care if you're a socialist. I don't care what color your skin is. I don't care who your daddy was. I don't care if you're a rhino Republican or conservative. I don't care. Which sheriff? Do you want a sheriff in your community who will act as a buffer between you and government officials and bureaucrats? Please answer that question.
You know, Sheriff, one of the when I was interviewing candidate Clark, one of the things that he said he's going to do right away is try to put together a posse. Now, if you could speak to the posse and how vital that is for a constitutional sheriff, and of course you can speak to any sheriff across the country. When you talk about maybe standing up with force, the people that would be standing up behind the sheriff would be his or her posse. Is that accurate?
Well, I think if the sheriff acts and if the sheriffs will become more united in this, there will never be violence. It'll never come to that. However, just in case you do need that, I certainly used a posse when I was sheriff. The greatest example of a posse is Maricopa County Sheriff Joe Arpaio, who has about 3,200 on his posse. Weren't we just talking about having citizens involved? Well, that's the way they get involved. Join the posse, be volunteers, help the sheriff. You know, if he has a list of people who are trained to help in emergencies, and I don't care what the emergency it could be anything. It could be a flood, it could be an earthquake, it could be any natural disaster, it could be helping with parades or fairs or whatever. It doesn't matter. Simply doing neighborhood watch programs. Those are all posse-oriented, and they come under the direction of the sheriff. And if, as in my case, when or others, where sheriffs do need extra help with extra manpower and firearms power, you know, it can come up. But, you know, I told the Army Corps of Engineers that they weren't going to be pulling their shenanigans in my county. And I said, if I need to, I'll call out the posse. But I think we can work this out without having to do that, don't you? And they did. And they said, oh, yes, yeah, well, you know. And so they backed off, and we took care of the people that we needed to take care of. And they got out of the way. And that needs to happen nationwide. And if we have sheriffs with a little courage and a little knowledge of the Constitution and their position, then we're going to make this happen and keep it peaceful.
Excellent, Sheriff. You know, if we can, if I can ask you something, if you'll indulge me, it's not a sheriff-related question, but you certainly can. I know you can talk about a wide variety of topics.
Oh yeah. Sure.
Brandon Smith, who you know, Brandon Smith from Alt Market, and I know he does some writing for the Oath Keepers website. You've probably met Brandon on a few occasions with Stuart Rhodes. He put out an article here yesterday or today. It's the title of it, I think it was yesterday. The time is ripe for a false flag attack on American soil. Do you think, and then you got General McInerney, I'm not sure if you saw on Fox News, comes out and says that he is concerned there's going to be another attack on September 11th. As I said, Sheriff, it's not really sheriff related, but if you would indulge me, and what do you feel about the false flag, potential for it? Are we ripe for that, as Brandon Smith alluded to in his article?
Well, I think that has already happened a time or two, but I'm not going to get into the specifics of that. I want to stay focused on what we really do at the CSPOA and Oath Keepers, but I don't mind talking about that. I believe that such a thing historically has happened many times, not just, in fact, maybe very rarely in America, but if you look at how Hitler did false flag attacks and then comes in with a solution, there's no question that is a strategy that has been used by communist regimes and dictators and banana republic dictators, and some of them have even been arrested for it and brought to justice. Manuel Noriega comes to mind. But so this is not something that's new. Your question is not new because it's just based on history when corrupt regimes have done such things. And right now, I will say we have the most corrupt regime in America in history in Washington, D.C. And it's not just Barack Obama, but he's the leader of it. And I don't trust him at all. I don't trust people who have done the things and committed the crimes that he and his staff have committed. It is just astonishing that they get away with murder that happened in Fast and Furious. And if they're willing to commit murder like that and then try to excuse it all because of executive privilege that Barack Obama got away with, they're willing to do other things that are even worse. And let's take, for example, his pet project, nationalized socialistic health care. He came in and created a problem that didn't exist. He said our health care in America is one of the worst, and he paraded victims around at the White House for his big press conference, and he created the problem. And then, of course, with all this wonderful propaganda scheme that the media picked up on big time and ran with it with him, he was able to come in with this supposed solution of, we will take care of you and we will force you, through the IRS no less, to take our health care program and policies. And so they are willing to blatantly destroy liberty, blatantly destroy our Constitution. And so then we're supposed to wonder if they would do a false flag attack to get us further more under their control? No, I do not doubt that they would do such a thing.
Now, Sheriff, we're seeing just a huge security issue happening on our southern border right now. It seems like we have no border whatsoever, and I know some of your sheriffs are in bordering states who are doing great work. What kind of challenges do you think this is going to pose? I mean, obviously there's a lot of challenges already happening right now. Can we get your thoughts on what's happening on the border and how we might be able to try to remedy that situation as best we can?
Yes, I was a sheriff just one county away from the border, just 100 miles or so from the border, and probably the most problematic border county in America is Cochise County, Arizona. And one of the ranchers has been killed there, and several other people killed, and they've discovered terrorists coming in through the southern border. Terrorists. I'm not talking about Guatemalans or El Salvadorians or Nicaraguans and Costa Ricans and Mexicans. I'm talking about terrorists who go to Mexico and then come up into America. And it's very likely that members of ISIS and other terroristic groups are already here because of that. And then our government tells us we have a war on drugs, but they allow drugs to come in so easily at the border, and then they spend $92 billion a year to stop that which they have already allowed at the border to occur. And so let me just put it this way. All of us are pretty much concerned, worried, and even scared about the lack of enforcement at our borders, and that we spend more money and time creating a bigger and stronger IRS than we do Border Patrol. And so with this kind of hypocrisy going on and this kind of subterfuge going on at the border, I can honestly tell all of your listeners this, that which you have heard about going on at the border is literally 10 times worse than what you've been told. What you have seen, I don't care where your resources come from. It could be WorldNet Daily or this program, Liberty Brothers, or it could be Alex Jones or Joyce Riley on the Power Hour, or Liberty Roundtable with Sam Bushman. It could be Fox News. I don't care. I don't care where you're getting your sources. Times it by 10, and that's how bad the problem is at the border. It is now increasing the threat of Ebola and other diseases. It is increasing threat of terrorists coming into our country, and they are here, and our government knows they're here. And I believe that our government has been an accomplice to terrorists coming in to America. And no matter what administration you have in Washington, D.C., they allow this to continue. And they allow the crimes of the IRS to continue. They allow the lack of security at our own border to continue. And yet they try to tell us and convince us that we need to be involved in this war on terror. You do not have a war on terror if you do not have security at your border. Period.
Well, I always thought it was funny that they're letting everybody in the border and they're still checking for Osama bin Laden in people's pants at the airport. But that's another story altogether. You know what I mean?
Let me compare that. Let me compare it to that. I have said this, and I love this comment. It is easier for a terrorist to enter our southern border than it is for you and me to get on an airplane.
Absolutely.
No, it's true. It's sad. It's a sad commentary.
It's
true.
It's a huge double standard that's happening right now.
And it's insane. Completely insane. And we have people in this country that keep voting for these career politicians in Washington, D.C., both Democrats and Republicans. And so we have got to stop that and do not vote for any Republican or Democrat career politician. If they've been in Washington, D.C. over 8 years, don't vote for them.
That's probably good advice. Sheriff, we're coming up on the hard break here pretty soon, and which will be the end of the interview, and I do not want to let you go. You've done so much fine work. I know you've written 6 different books, and you have a new one out. So before we go, please let our audience know how they can learn more about your fine work, any websites, Facebook pages, places. I know it's probably on Amazon. You maybe have it on your own website. Just go ahead. You've got the floor, Sheriff.
Well, thanks. We don't have the book at Amazon yet, but we're going to. And I'm going to tell you right now, if you want the best tool for freedom, you've got to get this book, Are You a David? It's available at CSPOA.org. CSPOA, Constitutional Sheriffs, Peace Officers Association, CSPOA. That's where we find this solution. And I'm not saying I created the solution. I didn't. I'm only a messenger. I'm a voice in the desert saying, folks, it's time to do a few things differently. Let's get back to those basic fundamental principles that made America great in the first place. And how do we take America back? County by county, sheriff by sheriff, and state by state. You have got to get a relationship with your sheriff. You've got to support constitutional candidates, like the candidate in Lincoln County. We've been talking. What's his first name? Bill Clark.
Bill Clark. You're correct. Bill Clark.
Absolutely. I totally endorse his candidacy and other sheriff's candidates across the country like him. We've got to get out there and donate to him, help him in any way that we can. Get involved in this process, folks. The political process is one thing and one thing only, to protect and defend and perpetuate our sacred Constitution and those fundamental rights that were God-given to us as we were born in this great country. Get involved with us. Join us in this holy cause of liberty, and you can do that at CSPOA.org. Make a donation, become a member, and get these books and get them out to the people who work for you in local governments.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, Sheriff Mack. We love talking with you, and hopefully we can have you on again sometime soon. Good luck in Washington, and I know we'd love to carry your book on our website and at least link to it so people can find it on your website. So we'll be sure to put that up. So
please do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sheriff, thanks so much for joining us today. Be well, my friend, and be safe.
Thanks, you guys. We'll see you soon.
Thanks.
All right. Well, that was Sheriff Richard Mack, and boy, I actually got to spend some time when I was down at Jackson County, Kentucky, with him, and he's just such a well-spoken man and very. He is very knowledgeable on a lot of things, and talk about a great network of really good people. That CSPOA, I've been so impressed with every single sheriff I've met there. So we'll be back at the other end of the hour, folks. Stick with us here on the Liberty Brothers.